Hi, I'm with the Academic Learning Centre and I'm going to talk to you today about when you need to reference in an academic assignment. What's really important is that you understand that you need to reference. First of all, we need to cite in text, that is, in the body of our essay, not just a reference list at the end. So, references in the text are often called citations. We use them when we summarise or paraphrase someone else's work, and the reader then knows where that information comes from. Students will say to me, but it's my own words. But we have to remember, the ideas came originally from someone else's work, so it's actually not your own. And your lecturer doesn't mind that you're using ideas from other sources, because it does demonstrate that you've read widely and that you understand what you've read because you were able to summarise it or paraphrase it. The sentences then do contain mostly your own words, but we still need to acknowledge where it comes from. So ask yourself, is this my idea? Are these my words? Is this my information? And if not, you must cite appropriately if you do not want to be suspected of plagiarism. Plagiarism is cheating, and in some cases students forget to cite or are not sure where to cite. This presentation will give you some examples and explain why and when and where you need to cite. If you're still unsure, come and find the ALC and ask for some assistance. Most students are aware that if it's a direct quote, it does have to be cited. It's the summary or the paraphrase that can be confusing. But all of those three must be cited, and you'll find you're frequently including citations throughout your work, almost every sentence sometimes. Example 1 here shows that the author Gibson has been used in the sentence. His name has been used in the sentence. I can read the sentence and leave the year, which is in brackets, out. Just read over it. The year is there to tell us how old the source is. The author is part of the sentence and it flows. Example 2, we can see the author Unterhalter has been included only in the brackets, along with the year and the page. The sample you're looking at there is an APA sample. Other author date systems such as Harvard will use slightly different format around the commas, but you still need a citation. Notice in that sentence too that there are quotation marks around a piece of it, yet the sentence flows very smoothly. The piece with the quotation marks is the quote. It comes from the author's work. It's word for word what Unterhalter wrote in his piece. The person who wrote this has left off some of that sentence. That's okay to do. Quotation marks show the reader which piece is Unterhalter's. What's important as a student when you do this is that you don't change the meaning of the author's work at any time when you quote, summarise or paraphrase. Another place that we need to use citations is if we use figures or tables. Images and pictures are considered figures. If you take these things from another's work, you do need to cite below it. You will also need a label. For a figure it goes below, for a table it goes above. We often find useful figures and tables and images in other authors' works, and we put them into our work exactly as they were by clipping them or recreating them. In that way we treat them similar to a quotation, and that means they need a page number as well to indicate where they come from. If you create a table with figures from a number of pages, then you would need to show that differently. If you create a table or take a photo and include it in your work and it's all of your information, then you would need a citation to show that author is the person who created it and the author of the work is you. Let's have a look at some examples of these. So this is an image of my screen now with a portion of an essay on it. You can see that it is actually using author date style or in this case APA. You may not be using APA, and we'll move on shortly to look at a sample of a footnoting style. Well, what's important for you to note here is the number of citations that are used in this piece of work. So, if we have a look here, we can see Gibson. And here it's used in the sentence, the author's name, as part of the sentence. This is an interesting one. It's a newspaper article, so it provides a lot of information about the newspaper and the title of the article, so it's a little bit different. You need to make sure that you check your referencing guide to know exactly what's required. You can see the student continues to use a number of authors in this piece, and in most cases there are authors' names used as part of the sentence. This one here has a page number, even though the author of this piece is not using a quote from OOP. The reason for that is that they have given a very specific detail in their piece, so they want the reader to be able to go back and find that. You'll need to think about when you need to use page numbers and have a look at the guidelines for more information. You can see towards the bottom of the paragraph, the author of this piece then begins to use the author's names, where the information's come from, in citations inside the bracket. So, here and here. But if you have a quick look, you will find very few sentences that don't have a citation. And you can see that this student has read 4 or 5 sources for one paragraph. So they're not using the same name over and over again. They're demonstrating that they've looked at a number of sources to gather their information. Because it's an author date style, the connection between the author in text should be easily followed by the reader to the reference list. The reference list is usually the last page of your essay, or the page before the appendices if you're writing a report. But let's have a look at the reference list for this piece. Here we can see that newspaper is shown at the top. Because there's no author, it's given the title and the name of the newspaper. There's Gibson following, and then Solomon, Previtt and Russell Bennett, and finally OOP. Here's an interesting citation. You can see that Atch, Coyen and Mallon are not in the reference list, and that's because the writer of this piece actually didn't read Atch, Coyen and Mallon's work. They read Gibson's work, and Gibson cited Atch, Coyen and Mallon. So in text we're giving acknowledgement of both authors, but in the reference list we're only referencing the source you actually read. There's lots to learn, and we don't expect you to do it on your own. But what's really important is that you remember to cite each time you use information from others' work, to collect enough information to be able to put together a reference list that shows author, year, title, if it's a journal article, volume and issue. Page numbers are required in the reference list, and these figures, DOIs, or web pages, publishers will tell us where it came from. So you're telling the reader who, when and where these sources are from. Let's have a look now at a footnote system. This footnote system is Turabian. If you quickly glance at that, you'll be able to see that there are very few citations obvious in it. But you'll be able to see some little tiny numbers. Here they are. And if I scroll near them, the citation comes up. This is a footnote system. In these examples, we can see the author's name because they're being used as part of the sentence. Here, this would be where in the previous one we might have put it in brackets instead. Notice here that the numbers go through 1 to 5, and then 6, and then 7. Now you may be required, depending on the footnoting system you're using, to have a reference list, or you might be required just to have footnotes at the bottom of the page. So here's the example with the footnotes at the bottom of the page. And you can see the connection here, the numbers 1 through 6, 7, and the information. Here we have a funny little word, ibid. Referencing uses a lot of Latin and Greek words and abbreviations. And basically this just means that it is the same source as the one up above, exactly. So we don't repeat it. The reference list, obviously, and the footnotes provides a lot more information than the in-text. Let's have a look at more information about those shortly. I'd like to first just show you a little bit about a figure. This figure would be something sitting in a report, mostly because essays, we don't put tables and figures and images in. Occasionally a lecturer may request them, but most often this kind of thing goes in a report. So you can see with the little speech bubbles around the outside, there's information about each of those aspects of that figure. This figure came from a source by M. Stelzner. It was created in 2011, and the title of the article is in italics underneath the figure, along with all of the other information, so the reader can find it. You'll also notice that it has a label figure 1, and a name. The name might be something the writer makes up, or it might be that you take it from the author's work and use it exactly the same. You will probably have to change the figure number to fit in the flow of your work. You can clip the figure out and then change the title underneath, the label underneath. Because this is APA style, it has a lot more information below the figure than Harvard style or other styles would. But what's important again is that you are aware that you need to label them and that you need to collect quite a bit of information to put below or in the reference list depending on the style that you use. You'll also notice that above the figure it says see figure 1 in brackets. So you don't just put the figure in and leave it there. You tell your reader where it is and what it's about and why it's there. But you don't have to cite up above in that sentence because you're citing below where you direct the reader to. Again, the page number is necessary here because you took this from a specific page in that author's work. So like a quotation, it's almost like word for word. Let's go back and have another look at what needs to go in a reference list. So we've talked a bit about in-text citations. Let's have a look more closely at end-text citations or reference lists and footnotes. As I mentioned, you need to be able to collect as much information as you can in order to allow the reader of your work to find where it came from. Most of that will go in the reference list or the footnotes. We call them full bibliographic details, and they must connect with what is in text, as we saw. The author's name and the year will connect with what's in the reference list. So take care to find the who, the when, the what and the where information, which includes the author, in some cases an editor, the date of publication, the title of the work, and the title of the journal it came from, or the book it came out of, because sometimes book chapters have different names and authors to the editor and cover of the book. You'll notice there's quite a lot of interesting sources out there. Page numbers are important too, in case you decide to quote or use a figure or a table. But with journals, we put them in the reference list anyway. If you're getting information from a website, you need to collect the URL. If you're using a journal, you may find that it has a DOI or a digital object identifier. Some students ask how many citations they should have in text. And as I've mentioned before, almost every sentence will have a citation when you first start to write. There will be some sentences in between that connect things or provide analysis on things, but that's where you ask yourself the question, is this my idea, my conclusion, or does the information belong to someone else? Citations should be within or at the end of a sentence, so the reader knows where the boundary is. Where does the information from that source start and finish? You can't assume they will know if you put it at the end or if you put it at the beginning of a series of sentences. So let's have a look at some examples of clear boundaries for in-text citations. On my screen now, you can see the same paragraph 3 times. It is slightly different each time, but I'm using this paragraph to demonstrate to you how you might create the flow between several sentences that come from the same author. Now, we do want to demonstrate to our lecturer or marker that we have read widely, but some assignments, or in some instances, we do want to use a couple of sentences from the same source. So in the first instance, you can see the first sentence is a topic sentence. It's my sentence. I've written it to tell the reader what this paragraph is going to be about. So I don't need to have a citation. Paragraphs should have a nice clear topic sentence telling the reader what's coming and what point you're trying to make. The second sentence is from a source written by Duverge in 2016, and I've used his name in the sentence and put the year in brackets. The third sentence begins with the word secondly. We call that a text connective, or it transitions the reader to know that there is a second idea or strategy that's come from Duverge. That helps the sentence flow. But I still need to cite Duverge, showing that the second sentence comes from the same source. Can't assume our reader will know. Make the boundaries clear. And the third, final sentence, we've used Duverge again and put his name in the sentence. So a couple of different styles of citing. In the next paragraph, you can see I have underlined a really nice way to lead our reader to understand that there are a number of preferences for learning coming from the same source, Duverge. In this way, I reorganise my sentences and my thoughts, and I tell my reader there are a number coming from the same source. And then I use the text connective to lead the reader through them. Firstly and furthermore. And that means you aren't repeating the author so many times. In actual fact, if you get very low on words, this is a good thing to do. Let's have a look at one more example. This example, the student has tried to make a sandwich with citations, yet has not created good boundaries. The topic sentence is fine. The second sentence starts with the author's name, Duverge, and tells us where that information comes from. And so does this sentence. But this sentence, you and I know it comes from Duverge because we've looked at a number of samples now. But if you were marking this, how would you know where it came from? The sandwich doesn't work. You need to cite again or use the text connectors. And certainly, just putting a citation at the end of a chunk of writing doesn't tell the reader where the stuff before comes from. So cite frequently and cite correctly, use clear boundaries, collect as much information as you can about who and when and where the information comes from so that you can create accurate in-text citations and accurate reference lists or footnotes. And make sure that you come and visit the ALC for help and find the referencing guide on our website that gives you some of this information.